So the next stance element we talk about is intervening in multiple domains. A domain here refers to an area of functioning. So it could be a biological domain. You know, if I have a chest infection and a fever, I need probably to think about intervening in a biological domain, some antibiotics perhaps, and some pain relief or antipyretics to bring my fever down. But equally there's a psychological domain, my thoughts and beliefs and feelings. And then there's a family domain. And then there's a social domain. We could break that up a bit more into the sort of social ecology, all of the sum of different aspects of the world in which I'm living in that collectively I have to kind of get through, but which will impact upon me. So there are multiple domains. And why do we want to intervene in multiple domains? Well, we've talked about the fact that young people's difficulties, particularly the kinds of young people that AMBIT is particularly being directed at, their problems are complex and they've arisen from more than one cause. And so in a sense the AMBIT approach is quite deliberately to avoid the rather narrowed, you know, I'm going to give you CBT because I'm a CBT therapist, or I'm going to give you psychodynamic psychotherapist because that's what I do, or family therapy, or I'm going to do a sort of social ecological intervention because that's what I do. And instead, to forcibly widen the angle of approach so that if I'm working beautifully with the young person's inner world, with their motivations, beliefs, thoughts or whatever, that's fine, but on its own it's not AMBIT, unless I'm also thinking about what am I doing with the family to help the family to understand the kind of changes that this young person's making so that they can accommodate it. And if I'm doing some work with a family, but I'm not doing any work with maybe their ordinary activities of daily living, have they got something useful and meaningful to be engaged in, then I'm probably not doing AMBIT. So there's always an effort to try to widen the lens and widen the spread of my interventions at this point. The counter to that, pulling in the opposite direction, is that you get what we talked about earlier, is this idea of disintegration. And we'll talk a lot more about that. But what you get if you're trying to intervene with different domains is very often, inevitably, other agencies, other workers, other settings are involved. And it's at this point that the key worker takes responsibility for integration. It's not okay to leave sticking together all the different things that different agencies are doing to the young person and the family. You know, we've had 100 years of research into the behavioural sciences, and it's about time that we were able to try to kind of coordinate and take responsibility for integrating the work that we deliver to a young person and family, rather than expecting them, at their most disintegrated, to be able to connect it all together. So that broadly, the approach, the work element, the practice element, we would call that addressing disintegration. That might involve a whole number of different modalities of treatment. AMBIT includes and embraces interventions drawn from a whole range of different schools of thought. You can find work on CBT, on family work, on social ecological interventions, working with pharmacological or prescribing, not doing the prescribing if you're is a doctor. But so there are many different modalities that are or could be integrated within AMBIT. The point about addressing disintegration is that we do not allow those well-intentioned interventions to actually having a sort of centrifugal force that are pulling in different directions. Moving on, AMBIT is extremely focused on the development and the sustaining of an individual key worker relationship. And I've explained that a little bit before, and your understanding of mentalising will now equip you to understand that it is in that experience of being mentalised that I learn to mentalise. and that I start to be able to take in information and learn socially and psychologically useful information. So we need to form a relationship. However, the young people that we're forming relationships with are both disturbed but also disturbing, it has to be said. In some sense you can see that as one of their mechanisms for engaging hell, that they really shake people up, and workers can get drawn into relationships that are anything but therapeutic. They may feel subtly being invited to collude with pretty dangerous or risky behaviours. There may be more overt aggression that is frightening and causing them to want to back away. It may be that something more seductive is at work. One way or another, it's very hard for an adult trying to maintain a therapeutic position, particularly if you're a little isolated, either working at the end of a long corridor or in the family home or out in a car park or on the street. Very difficult to hold on to a relationship that is sustainably therapeutic. So the counter to that is that as strongly as we want the worker to make a relationship with the young person, just as strongly we need them to make relationships with their colleagues, with the team. So that we talk about this phrase of being the key worker being well connected to the team. It's important that those two are balanced. The stronger my relationship with the young person, the more I need to attend to how I remain supported by and in touch with my colleagues in the team. The practice that relates to that we call supervisory structures, and that really tries to use mentalizing as a tool whereby workers can think about relationship with the young person, but in particular the relationships with their peers. How do you discuss the way this work affects you, your worries about your work, and how do you get something back that is genuinely helpful, that genuinely helps you plan and execute better work that is helpful for the young person. The final two, again, pull in different directions. On the one hand, AMBIT is very clear that the people that we tend to train already have a lot of experience and expertise of working with the young people that they're working with. And it's important that AMBIT recognises and respects that. Equally, within teams, we recognise that because of the disintegration that can easily happen in networks, it's extremely easy for a team, subtly, to get drawn into quite disrespectful assumptions and myths about other agencies. Social workers are, they never do anything. What's the point of referring to them? Doctors, all they want to do is shove them full of pills. Psychotherapists, they just waffle, they'll never see anybody. Very, very easily, for any part of a complex, multiple system, to develop a sense of their self defined against the failures and faults that are perceived in other parts of it. So insisting on respect for local practice and expertise is something that AMBIT tries to take in relation to the teams that use and build upon AMBIT, but equally it would insist that teams take towards other elements of the system. And the second sort of counteracting to that is respect for evidence, which actually is another way of saying respect for our clients and the young people that we work with. That AMBIT is very much trying to harness and deliver in usable packages at street level, if you like, or in more isolated settings, evidence-based approaches that have been demonstrated to be effective and helpful. So we think about respect for evidence, and that takes in the individual modalities that are inside the manual, but equally the approach of the team to evidence. We would like teams to become curious, mentalizing if you like, about why do we do it like that? Under what circumstances would we want to do it like that? How would we find out that. What questions are we interested about our practice? Which of course comes down to different forms of measuring our outcomes and using the feedback from those outcomes to inform and redirect and hone and sharpen the effectiveness of what we do. So gathering and using outcomes evidence is another completely central part of AMBIT. And the way that we try to hold these two together, respect for evidence and respect for local practice and expertise, is an attempt to avoid people becoming just lone rangers who go off and say, well, I know how to do it anyway, and to avoid also the sort of dead hand of, the computer says no, you have to do it like this, and to find a middle point. And our resolution for that is a rather novel approach to treatment manualisation. We call it wiki manualisation. Those of you who go on the internet will no doubt have found Wikipedia. The nature of a wiki is that it's a website that its users can edit. And we use quite specialist wiki software so that not anybody anywhere can edit our team's manuals. And different parts of the team's manuals are owned and controlled by different levels, if you like. But we encourage this meeting of evidence with local experience. So if you like, evidence-based practice meeting practice-based evidence, and a team is encouraged, expected even, to overwrite, improve, intercalate material that relates to this is how we are doing this work here with these young people, and these are some of the innovations that we have. And if I remind you, at the end of the beginning of this talk, I talked about this idea of a community of practice. And the whole point about these wikis is that teams in this way are able to look over each other's shoulders, even though they may be hundreds of miles apart, and gather some of the really great new practice or ways of addressing difficulties that are arising at street level in other services around the place, and to share these innovations at light speed. So, that is by and large all I want to say. Here's an element of just playfulness, and we've kind of finished, but in a sense the worker is a little bit like a ship at sea. Our mentalising goes up and down with the waves. At times, explicitly, we can see where the lighthouse is that we're trying to head for. At times, we're in the troughs. And when we're in the troughs, we tend to be working with rather non-mentalising ways of behaving. And that's why we need some kind of map, which is the approach that we use, which is we would say that our treatment manual is a kind of map that helps us direct where we want to get to. So we use the manual to provide a core of AMBIT material, and then every team that comes across, that starts with AMBIT, can open their own wiki, and they can include the material that's in the core into their own local version of that manual. And that way, expertise that is slowly itself growing in relation to feedback is shared between multiple teams. But then say this team here finds an excellent bit of practice-based evidence that they find works. Another team may copy it, and another team may copy it. And if enough teams have copied one new piece of practice from one team, we may look at the evidence for the effectiveness of that and draw it back down into the core, at which point it's automatically shared with everybody. So this is a way of really speeding the dissemination of new practice. And that's what the wiki-based manual looks like. Local versions will look differently. You can change so that it's your team's name and your icon there, and you can change and add extra material to your, well, any page you can change. And that's an example of one team in Cambridgeshire, and you'll notice it says here versions of this page in other manuals, and at this point there were 7 other manuals with different versions, and you can click on that and line up the different pages and compare them and say, well, you know, what are they doing in Edinburgh? Oh, great stuff, you know. And this is this idea about developing a community of practice, and there are many other ways of what we call comparing and sharing in the manual, which are all explained in the manual. So that's the end of this brief summary of AMBIT. Various publications, a very good book, a publication in the CAMH journal, and we've got a paper coming out in early 2013, we hope, in Attachment of Human Development. And thank you very much for listening. That's the website for the all of the manuals. It's a sort of signposting site. tiddlymanuals.com. So do go and have a look at it. It's open source, freely available, and anybody can access manuals. That's part of the mentalising approach, to be very explicit about what our intentions are.